So it's Aaron Maté, ladies and gentlemen. He's a contributor to The Nation. He's previously reported and produced for Democracy Now!, Vice, Al Jazeera. But the big thing is, here. Let me show you the award he won, and then we'll have him be all proud of it. Here it is. It says, a huge honor to be among winners of the annual Izzy Award for Achievement in Independent Media. Named after journalism legend I.F. Stone, I was cited for meticulous reporting for The Nation that consistently challenged the way the public was being informed about RussiaGate. Well, isn't that nice that you got to win an award for it after people maligned you for 2.5 years for having journalistic standards?
It's really nice, and maybe it's shameless, but I happen to have the award plaque right here.
Oh, there it is.
And and I wanted to show it, Jimmy, just to say that I owe this award partly to you because you gave me a platform when no other major platform did, and you helped me reach a lot of people. And your skepticism of this issue was inspiring. And, I've heard from many people just write to tell me that how much they relied on you and all the work you did. So as someone who's being honored for, pushing back against this prevailing conspiracy theory, I honor someone like you as well who did the same and who did such important work. So I just wanted to share this honor with you.
Well, thank you, Arno. I mean, talking to that's my tech guy. I mean, thank you, Aaron. I really appreciate you saying that. And
it's okay. It's okay, Jimmy, because they actually misspelt my last name.
No!
Here, look where they put the accent. It's on the end, but they're sending me a new.
Aaron Maté.
Aaron mate.
Hello, mate.
We all do it, and it's okay. I'll take even a misspelled plaque. I'm very thrilled with it.
Yeah. Well, when they misspell your name, that really hurts. Even when they smeared me in the Washington Post, they got my name right, which was nice. So you won that award for your fantastic and meticulous reporting on RussiaGate, and now you've taken a lot of heat for it. Heat meaning you've been ostracized. Like, I know what it's like. I know what it's like to walk into a newsroom and feel like Serpico walking into a police precinct. I know what that feels like, right? So what does it feel like now for you?
Well, I mean, today's a big day, and I think now we're just in a new phase because, the conspiracy theory is just like, it shouldn't have been sustainable yesterday, but after today, I mean, how can they possibly keep it going now? We now have the full Mueller report. We have Mueller going through all the pillars of the conspiracy theory, and he destroys them all. Glenn Greenwald just wrote a great piece about this, that basically all the key planks of the Trump-Russia conspiracy theory, all the narratives we've heard for so long to sustain this idea that Trump and the Kremlin conspired and that he was carrying out their orders and through all these various intermediaries. The Mueller report shows it to be bullshit, which I think, so for as much heat as we've taken, we'll continue to take that heat from, privileged media pundits who've profited off of spinning the conspiracy theory. But I think, I have faith in common sense, and I have faith that anybody I do. I don't
How the fuck could you have faith in common sense after this last 2.5 years?
I'm not talking about the faith in the common sense of media elites and political elites. I'm talking about common sense in average viewers.
Okay.
In those of us who are in the public who have been fed this propaganda for 2 years. Now the final report comes in and consistently just blows away all the key pillars of what kept this whole thing going. So I have faith in people's ability to see through the lies that they've been fed for the last 2.5 years.
Well, a most recent Gallup poll said that 50% of Americans think that Trump is a victim of a witch hunt.
Well, there we go. And his approval rating has also increased. And this is why, some of us, from putting aside the journalistic angle where, as journalists, we're not supposed to, peddle what's a convenient narrative, but follow the facts. So putting aside our journalistic duties as progressives, this is why people like you and I have been warning for so long that RussiaGate was in fact a massive gift to Trump, because it's channeling liberal energy into a conspiracy theory building up expectations that Robert Mueller was going to validate it. And now when Robert Mueller doesn't validate it, he demolishes it and the whole narrative implodes. Then Trump now has the added gift, on top of having a resistance distracted by a conspiracy theory and not focusing on his actual policies. Now he has the added gift of claiming exoneration. And he'll bring that into 2020, and we haven't even seen the start of it. We've seen Trump, being triumphant, and we've seen a little bit. Like there was one campaign ad where he shows a headline from Fox News saying Mueller finds no collusion. But now also he has William Barr, and he has the Senate controlled by Republicans, and they're going to use their powers to investigate the investigation. And unlike the investigation, they're actually going to find some damning stuff because from the beginning, this was a shady investigation. And that's just an unfortunate fact that anybody who wants to see Trump defeated in 2020 has to grapple with.
So when you say this was a shady investigation, do you mean that the FISA warrants, which were based on the dossier, which was completely discredited? No, did I get any of that wrong?
No. Not at all.
So there are people still pretending that the dossier wasn't. In fact, I have videotape of MSNBC hosts saying that every bit of it is true. How could that be?
The only thing in the dossier that's true, basically, is stuff that was already true by the time Steele wrote it.
Right.
So basically, what Steele and the sources did is they took public developments, like the fact that there was a platform issue at the RNC platform. They took what was publicly reported, used their imaginations, and spun that into to fit their conspiracy narrative. But in terms of all the claims about the Steele dossier, Carter Page brokering, contacts between Trump and Moscow, being offered billions of dollars in the Russian state oil company, Michael Cohen traveling to Prague to meet to arrange coordination with Russian hackers. I mean, none of that's in there, and all of that is in fact undermined. So that's a fantasy. I mean, nobody's serious. Nobody remotely serious, or even one who can speak in public, can now claim that the Steele dossier is has been verified. And exactly. So the fact is that early on in this investigation, the FBI said in their application to apply on Carter Page, a then former Trump campaign volunteer, that the FBI believes that Carter Page is coordinating between Moscow and the Trump campaign, and their top source for that was the Steele dossier. So more stuff like that is going to come out, and it's going to look terrible for the investigation, because it shows that not only is the FBI getting a surveillance warrant to spy on someone based on a uncorroborated piece of intelligence or like piece of opposition research, that opposition research is paid for by Trump's opponent, Hillary Clinton, which they don't specify in the application. So that's one of innumerable things that Trump will now use to his advantage. And I've suspected for a while that Trump is more rational than we think he is. And he's known for a long time that this day would come, that there'd be this dud on collusion and give him this gift. And that would give him the opportunity then to turn the tables and find out stuff that could embarrass the people who tried to take him down and thus validate his claims of a witch hunt. All of which can help him, as Noam Chomsky just said recently, that this whole thing may very well hand Trump re-election in 2020. I don't think that's unfair speculation.
And let me tell you something about people who are pushing RussiaGate the loudest. Now, I know that one of the people who are pushing RussiaGate the loudest with a huge platform, it was told to him that, you're pushing an evidence-free, red-baiting Russia conspiracy theory against the president of the United States. And if that doesn't stop you from doing it, just the knowledge that that's what you're doing, wouldn't you want to stop it if you knew it was actually helping him? And no, they said that they hate him that much that they can't stop. So
they hate him that much that they want to help him
that they
win
can't
re-election?
Stop. Again, this is secondhand information. The person told me that. I said, so what did they say when you said, this, if you know this is helping him, why won't you stop? And I was told, again, it's the secondhand, that it's because I hate him just that much.
Well, can I add something?
Sure. Ron Placone is here. He wants to add something.
Just this week, Trump campaigned as a non-interventionist. We know this. Just this week, he used his second veto to veto the bill to end U.S. involvement in Yemen. And you're not hearing about it a whole lot.
You're not
because of
hearing
this
about
stuff.
it. You're not hearing about it at all. What are we talking about? We're talking about RussiaGate and Mueller and Barr. And so let me just go through this really quick. So Chuck Todd tweeted this out this morning. Can you see this, Aaron? He says, curious why the number one response to this report by every elected official isn't concern about how easily the Russians hacked the election and how way too many Americans cheered this on and hoped it was truer than the ethically decide was true rather than ethically decide it should be stopped. So what Chuck Todd is doing there is, again, still pushing an evidence-free conspiracy theory at the top of his lungs and slandering other Americans as being Russian agents. That's what when he says way too many Americans cheered this on. So I just said it's curious to me as to why guys who misled the American public for 3 straight years still get to host news shows. So I also want you to remind you before we get into that. So he says that what he's really concerned about is how easily the Russians hacked the election. And as the guy right underneath him said, hacked the election, I'd like to ask if you even know the meaning of the term hacked. But the bigger question is, how is a so-called journalist like you such a hack? And that can you just comment, Aaron, real quickly on the number one newsman in America, Chuck Todd, how he revealing he never graduated college because he doesn't even understand the words he's using?
Well, look, the whole premise of RussiaGate reveals such contempt by elites like Chuck Todd for average citizens. This idea that that by these stupid social media posts from Russia that nobody saw, and then if they saw them, they were a joke. That's detailed extensively, and that these stolen emails had the power to hack the election. That this supposed Russian influence was so powerful that all these malleable Americans were swayed by Russia's manipulation. I mean, that's an expression of contempt by elites like Chuck Todd, and it's also an expression of contempt that they expect us to that they, as journalists who are responsible for holding the powerful to account and to talk about issues that impact all of our lives, that they're hyper fixated on RussiaGate for 2.5 years above all else, basically just ignoring how all the key issues that impact our lives, the environment, the economy, war, everything. It's like turning media into a playground for elites where they play out their little squabbles and come up with spy thriller fantasies that make them feel better about Donald Trump being implanted by the Kremlin. But, even on the factual issue of Russia hacking the election, right? There's something really interesting in the indictment. And I want to talk to you about it because, Jimmy, you've aired people like William Benny, who's expressed serious doubts about the official narrative that the Russians stole all these Democratic Party emails. Personally, I've been very agnostic, in part because I don't really understand all the computer jargon. And I've seen arguments both ways. Mueller did lay out a very detailed indictment of these Russian military intelligence officers. But let me read you something that he says in his report that blew my mind.
Okay.
Mueller is not in his report, from my reading, and in case anybody out there can show me something differently, Mueller is not definitively claiming that Russia stole the DNC emails, right? He does say that Russia stole John Podesta's emails. But John Podesta's emails were not hacked.
Right.
That came from a spearfish, basically.
Right.
Someone sent him a fake link. He clicked on it, put in his password, and they stole his emails. So Mueller blames Russia for that. So, okay. But in terms of this attack, this hack into the DNC and the stealing of the emails, listen to what Mueller says. So he's talking about how the GRU stole documents from the DNC network. And then later on gave them to WikiLeaks, okay? And he says, during these connections, this GRU unit, the officers of this GRU unit, quote, appear to have stolen thousands of emails and attachments, which were later released by WikiLeaks in July 2016, unquote. I'll read that again. These GRU officers, quote, appear to have stolen thousands of emails and attachments, which were later released by WikiLeaks in July 2016, unquote. So what's the word appear doing there? If Mueller knows that the GRU stole the documents, why doesn't he just say the GRU if Mueller knows that the GRU stole the emails, why doesn't he just say the GRU stole the emails? Mueller qualifies that. He says appear to have stolen the emails.
So the reason why he says that is because it could appear that way, but the fact is he doesn't have any evidence of it. Why? Because it didn't happen. That's why. So he has to say appear. The word appear appears there because he doesn't have actual evidence. If he had evidence, he would take the word appear out and it would say the GRU hacked the DNC server, not that they appear to have. So that's why you use qualifying words like that when you don't have evidence. And Bill Binney told us that on this show. You can tell by the wording that the intelligence agencies use around their level of confidence. And he said if you look at the NSA, what they said, it revealed around their version of the hacking, the Russia, that he said they have no evidence. So they used a term like, well, we have confidence, but not high confidence. It was like a low bar of confidence that Russia, and he said the reason why they say that is because they don't have evidence. And as soon as I saw that, this is Bill Binney, he said, I knew they didn't have any evidence. So that's why they use the word appear, right, Aaron? Because if he had evidence of it, he wouldn't use that word.
Well, yes. I mean, I will say I'm not going to agree with you that this means that it didn't happen. I'm not going to go that far as you and Benny, but I will say that this certainly, I think, is a big plus for Benny's argument, and it needs to be acknowledged now. We need to actually discuss this seriously, and you guys deserve credit for raising this because, again, someone like me who is a RussiaGate skeptic, I've sort of stayed on the sidelines of this issue, but this language, as exactly as you say, if Mueller had the evidence for it, he would say it. And the fact that he doesn't, he qualifies it, says a lot, especially when you compare it to what else he says right before that. Mueller does say this quote. He says, quote, stolen documents included the DNC's opposition research into candidate Trump, quote. So Mueller is affirming that the GRU's stolen material is definitely opposition research, right? But he's not saying the stolen material is the DNC emails, which, of course, that was the big thing. That was the thing that Hillary Clinton and the Democrats are blaming, are citing as the reason, as a big reason for their loss. The fact that these DNC emails were released. The DNC emails were the big thing. So listen,
they said that was an act of war.
Yeah, exactly right. An act of war. Well, Mueller, we now know, doesn't have the evidence to assert for sure that the act even happened. And, you know, I'm not going to go there and say that, I'm not going to go there and say that I think that this means definitely that it was a leak or whatever it is. I don't know. But I do think that this raises serious questions. And, you know, anybody who can look at that language and see the qualification has to realize that Mueller is now, he's telling us that he does not definitively believe, or at least he doesn't definitively have the evidence that Russia stole the DNC emails.
Yes. And you're being, of course, you're being way overcautious. In my view, you're being way overcautious. So, but that's what you do. You use these journalistic standards, and then we make fun of you for them. And then you win an award, and then everyone pretends you didn't. So I just want to, can you show this, Arno? So I want to show one more thing about Chuck Todd tweeting this out. What you don't notice right away, but what I did notice right away was the unbelievable goalpost moving that he's also doing here. So for 3 years, he screamed at the top of his lungs that Donald Trump is an agent of Russia, and he's conspired with a foreign power, and he's corrupt, and this is the narrative they've been pushing with no evidence. So now it's been 100% debunked, and now he keeps pushing a red baiting conspiracy theory that indicts and impugns Americans' loyalty to our country. This is what he's still doing. And so I just wanted, somebody made a great meme, and he says, "Oh, I was told there'd be collusion." I was told there'd be collusion. You were telling us there'd be collusion for 3 years, and now there isn't, and you guys still keep screaming. Instead of quitting journalism and going back to being a professional bookie, which is what a guy like Chuck Todd should be doing, taking sports bets instead of revealing the news that he doesn't know. Here he is. He's still doing it. And by the way, he's the #1 newsman in America, hosts Meet the Press. The guy never finished college, and he's a conspiracy theorist, and he doesn't even know what the word hacked means. This is why people come to this show. This is why I have a show. And I want to say thank you, Chuck Todd, with your Caesar haircut that you'll never get rid of. And I want to say thank you for being fucking horrible. Thank you. So here's someone named Michelle Goldberg said that arrogant. So then Barr had a press conference this morning. Did you see it, Aaron?
I did.
Now, I didn't see it. So can you tell people what happened and what your take on it was?
Great. Barr laid out the case that Mueller made. I mean, one thing that, all these people, whether it's Barr or whether it's Adam Schiff, they're all going to go behind this narrative that Russia attacked the United States. And so, and Mueller's report tried to make that argument as well, basically. So Barr laid that out, but then he laid out the collusion thing, and he's definitely playing to Trump, and he says that the report found no evidence of collusion, and that was unequivocal. And then he launched into a defense of his decision on obstruction of justice, and people went crazy. I mean, people were already going crazy, even just the fact that this press conference was happening. Like, if you watch Maddow the night before Barr's press conference, she's like, why isn't Mueller going to be there? Where is Mueller? Like, how come Barr is holding a press conference about a report we can't even read? So basically, people are freaking out the fact that Barr is having a press conference about a report that's coming out in like an hour or two anyway. And literally, like, the report was available like an hour later. So I don't, like, why are journalists all of a sudden so upset about a news conference?
And they were making it seem like this was the craziest thing in the world that he would do.
Crazy, yeah,
and this is proof that he's working for Trump and under the thumb. And I'm like, he's having a press conference about a thing you're going to read in an hour?
Yeah, exactly. And then it's interesting, if the questions that were asked, all of them were about obstruction. All of them. So no one's asking about collusion. After talking about collusion for 2+ years, all of a sudden, these same people don't want to talk about collusion.
Don't want to talk about it. So
well, I wonder why.
Let me show this real quick. So this person, Michelle Goldberg, tweets out that arrogant, willfully misleading press conference was shocking, even by 2019 standards. Were you shocked by it, Aaron? Were you shocked by it?
No, and as
what does
Glenn
that mean?
Greenwald,
What is that?
No, and again, it's so much of RussiaGate is a projection, right? So what are her words there? Arrogant and willingly deceitful?
Willfully misleading.
Willfully misleading. Well, what she's talking about are RussiaGate conspiracists like her. Michelle Goldberg wrote a column called something like "Trump is compromised by Russia" or something like that. And so, so she's among many liberal pundits who were just offended by Trump's victory, but unfortunately didn't have the political wherewithal to think about, well, do we want to be a real resistance and oppose him on his policies, or do we want to latch onto this conspiracy theory that makes us feel better, And so she chose, she's among many who chose to latch onto this conspiracy theory that made them feel better, thereby then proceeding to be extremely arrogant and willfully deceitful as they ignore the countervailing facts that undermine this narrative that makes them feel better but is terrible. And that's why she goes on to say in that interview, in that tweet, about something about how this is like a preview of how we're lurching into an authoritarian junta, which is just like tell that to someone who's actually lived under an authoritarian junta.
Yeah, her direct quote is, "We continue to underreact to our government's transformation into an authoritarian junta."
Yeah.
Okay. Glenn Greenwald's response to her was, "Arrogant and willfully misleading are perfect terms for those in D.C. and the media who spent 3 years drowning U.S. politics in incredibly dangerous but debunked conspiracy theories about a nuclear-armed power taking over our government and the Trump campaign conspiring with them."
Yeah.
So, but you don't. So I find the over-the-top, hyperbolic lying by the press in general. There's Chuck Todd, there's Michelle Goldberg. It's just I find that irreconcilable. I don't find this reconcilable. if you are in journalists, you're a journalist or you're in journalism and you don't take a moment out of your day at some point in your life to push back against this kind of stuff, then you're not a journalist and you're a propagandist and you're a go-along person. So people like you have pushed back, people like me, Kyle Kalinske, Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi. There's only a handful of people, Lee Camp, there's only a handful of people who have done this. And so what a lot of people say is, well, there's a lot of good work that being done at the New York Times and the Washington Post, and there is. But why don't those people who are doing all that other good work take 5 minutes out of their fucking life to stand up against this? Why won't they do that? Well, I'll tell you why. Because it wouldn't forward their career. And that's what they really care about, which is why I don't have any goddamn respect for the whole of journalism. What do you say, Aaron?
I mean, I share your contempt for many of these people, and I will say that I've had some friendships strained, and some people really disappoint me over either for
Preach it to the choir. Preach it to the choir, buddy.
either for buying into the conspiracy theory or for failing to stand up to it, and I especially fault those who have institutional security. I mean, I get it. I can't expect everyone to be a martyr and to risk their livelihood, even though something is transparently bullshit like RussiaGate. You know what I mean? It's, like not everyone is duty bound to do that. It's not. I mean, like those of us who did it, I'm really grateful for all of us. I'm really grateful for you, really grateful for Glenn, my editor at The Nation, Katrina vanden Heuvel, who stood up to a lot of internal attacks on her for publishing people like me and publishing people like the esteemed professor Stephen Cohen, a professor emeritus at Princeton and NYU, who's somehow deemed like objectionable because he happens to be like one of the smartest voices in America when it comes to Russia, but he doesn't go along with the prevailing consensus. So I'm grateful, but I'm not going to fault everybody, but I do fault people who have institutional security, who claim to care about progressive politics, and who said nothing. And and unfortunately, it afflicts even progressive and adversarial outlets. It's not just even in like. It's not just at like the Washington Post or Vox or at the New York Times. It's even people who have, strong progressive values and backgrounds. And I don't think it's all careerism, but I think careerism is a big factor. I think it's just people get scared. They don't want to get smeared as, they don't want to. And
yeah, I know
like
they don't have the courage that people like you show. I know the people who push back against, they don't have the courage, which is kind of key to being a journalist, is to have courage and not really have, not be interested in making fake friends. But that's what most of the people in journalism are about. They're about their career, and they don't have a lot of courage. And because that's what it takes to do this. It took a lot of guts to stick your chin out, Aaron, and do this. And thank God you found someone like Katrina vanden Heuvel over at The Nation to champion your writing. Otherwise, you would have been spending you and me on our Jagoff YouTube channel, and nobody would have been getting awards. So it's
true. It's true. It's true. Listen, I can tell you that I tried to write this stuff at The Intercept. It wasn't welcome there.
Wow.
I wrote one piece about Rachel Maddow, and like that. Like you covered this on your show. I wrote a piece there about Rachel Maddow.
Yeah.
And talking about how she covered Russia more than all the issues combined, and going through and debunking a lot of her conspiracy theories, basically arguing very politely that she was a propagandist. That piece did very well, but after that, I was never welcomed back at The Intercept again. Yeah, and I tried, and I thought that of all outlets, a website like an outlet that is, that calls itself fearless and adversarial would want to put resources to challenging the claims of intelligence officials like John Brennan and challenging this, this conspiracy theory that was so widespread across the corporate media. But they weren't interested, and they instead went and hired Jim Risen.
Jim Risen, who famously misused the word treason. It was pointed out to him on video he was misusing it. He admitted he was misusing it, and then he said, I don't give a fuck. I'm going to keep misusing it. And because words aren't that important to journalists like Jim Risen, when he's angry at someone like Donald Trump, he reveals all the cracks in his personality. A guy like Donald Trump revealed every crack in Jim Risen's personality, and it was shone a light on, and that guy fell down on the job harder than fucking anybody, and I wish he would quit doing what he's doing.
And to The Intercept's credit, they published Glenn Greenwald, who was like, who pushed back on RussiaGate from the beginning. Before I did, it was pretty much him and Bob Perry, the late legendary Bob Perry
yeah.
of Consortium News, a legend, who so Glenn and Bob Perry were among the first. And so Glenn deserves a lot of credit, but The Intercept cannot take credit for what Glenn did because Glenn has autonomy. He does whatever he wants, and they had nothing to do with what he did.
So who are the people that you work for at The Intercept? Who were your editors that said no?
It's not. I'm not going to get into individuals, but it's But the point is, institutionally, there was a decision that this website that does such great work, they do. I mean, I love The Intercept actually. I think it's a great website. But on this key issue, the one that was engulfing our politics, I mean, they could maybe argue to the contrary if they want to, but I think they made a concerted editorial decision to not be aggressive and adversarial, but to be careerist and to go along with the prevailing narrative and sort of burnish their adversarial bona fides through Glenn Greenwald, over whom, again, they had no editorial control. And that's why, for example, they also published this really overhyped and overblown piece based on the Reality Winner leak about how Russia was trying to hack into U.S. voting systems. I mean, if you look at the actual document that they based their article on, the document itself doesn't even show what they said it did. It was like a vague attribution of to Russian hacking, but that was based on like one analyst's judgment, and it was contextual information. It wasn't even. They distinguished between contextual information and confirmed information, which it was not, but they ignored that. It also was basically a spear phishing attack that they were talking about, which they kind of minimized. So spear phishing is not like a sophisticated hacking thing, as illustrated by the fact that whoever was carrying out this supposed massive attack on our election system was using a Gmail address, like impersonating a voting company with a Gmail address. And that's why when I had on James Risen, when I was back at The Real News and we discussed this issue, he couldn't defend the substance of the article, and he hung up on me.
And he hung up on you and said, takes a lot of courage, to use no journalistic standards in writing an article. It takes zero courage then to hang up on you. It's the opposite of what a journalist should have.
Yeah. And I'll say also my former workplace, Democracy Now!, which is my favorite news show, has such a noble legacy. And I've benefited a lot from it. But their top guest on RussiaGate was Marcy Wheeler, who is one of the most vocal conspiracy theorists out there who, and
revealed a source to the FBI, no?
That's right. She also turned in a source to the FBI who she said was played a key role in what she called Russia's attack on the election. Well, her source and her story are nowhere in the Mueller report, and we haven't heard her explain what happened there. And yet she was treated by many people as a sort of a hero for turning in her source, when really she was actually like violating one of the core tenets of journalism, is you don't turn in your source to the government. And now we know, based on the fact that Mueller didn't go anywhere with it, that it was totally baseless, as was her entire conspiracy theory. So, I'm not saying that these two outlets, Democracy Now! And The Intercept, were the worst, but the fact that even our most noble outlets could drink the Kool-Aid and go along with it, I think really says something about how bad this our media culture was.
And that's why it was emotionally wrenching for me to see places like Democracy Now!, The Intercept, the Young Turks, where I work, pushed RussiaGate. It destroyed me kind of internally, right? It was way worse than the Iraq War for me, because at least during the Iraq War, most of the people on the left were awake about it, right? But this was ubiquitous. It was just a horrible. And well, I looked up who's the editor. Betsy Reed is the editor-in-chief of The Intercept. Betsy Reed is the editor based in New York City. Glenn Greenwald is the co-founding editor. Now we know where he stood at. And then the other one is Jeremy Scahill. He's the co-founding editor. So I'm going to guess Betsy Reed sets the tone over at the over there, I guess. And yeah, it was a real falling down on the job. Again, not only no congratulations, but no apologies. Zero apologies from people for putting us in this horrible position. Hey, sorry for fucking putting you guys in this position and not helping you out, and repeating breathlessly the fucking reports from the intelligence community. I mean, honest to God, Aaron. I mean, honest to God. Can you look those people in the eye again with any amount of respect? Those people who reported the intelligence community red baiting bullshit? Because I can't. And that's a big problem. But I'll ask you.
I think, I don't know. I try to come at people and imagine that in their head they had the best intentions possible, even if they actually didn't. And I don't know. It depends who they are. Someone like Rachel Maddow, who makes $10 million a year, who was an unhinged propagandist, who misled so many liberals into believing in this fantasy. I mean, no, like that's someone who I think is far gone, and I think should resign from journalism along with many others. But like I don't know people's personal situation. I don't know where they're coming from. Again,
What about the people? Let me ask you this. What about the people who are pushing RussiaGate, who then slandered people like you, who were getting it right and using journalistic standards, and then red baited you or slandered slandered you as being a lunatic or an Alex Jones?
Sure. Yeah, but I never respected those people anyway. You know what I mean? I'm talking about in terms of like the people where I'm trying to say that there's room for growth and for some, I don't know, learning there. It's just people who on the surface maybe thought that they were resisting Trump, that it was just like the best spin I can put on it is that it was shallow political thinking. Like it was basically a complete just abandonment of what we're all supposed to do as journalists and as political actors, which is, think and use our heads. And so on the surface, they saw that this was told to us as the way to resist Trump. So they went along with it. They didn't want to appear in a very superficial way to be supporting Trump, even though, of course, as we know now by the result, that the consequence of peddling this conspiracy theory and enabling it is that it actually helped Trump.
Yes.
And, and that is the part that really annoys me, especially, is because like this notion, seeing Glenn Greenwald, being described as a Trump supporter is, it's just a joke because, as I've said, all these people who promoted the conspiracy theory and who are still doubling down on it now, they're not anti-Trump. They're actually Trump 2020 gift wrappers. They are wrapping up a re-election gift to Trump and handing it to him with their big platforms. And so, those people, unless they, apologize and ask for forgiveness, no, they can't be forgiven.
I agree with you. Here's Glenn Greenwald. He tweeted out and he wrote an article today entitled, "Robert Mueller did not merely reject the various Trump-Russia conspiracy theories, he obliterated them. Given that Mueller could not establish that even Carter Page coordinated with Russia, nor could he find evidence to establish that Carter Page was an agent of Russia, isn't it time to revisit whether the FISA warrant to spy on Carter Page was justified? That's a big deal." And then he links to, here's from the report, and I'll read it to you what it says. It says, "However, the investigation did not establish that Page coordinated with the Russian government in its efforts to interfere in the 2016 president." So no, so they still got a FISA warrant off of him, even though that they couldn't. And then here's a little bit more. It says the investigation did not, however, yield evidence sufficient to sustain any charge that any individual affiliated with the Trump campaign acted as an agent of a foreign principal within the meaning of FARA, which is the Foreign Agent Registration Act, or in terms of Section 951. Now, here's the highlighted part. Subject to the direction or control of the government of Russia or any official thereof. So what it's saying is the investigation did not yield evidence to sustain any charges that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign was subject to the direction or control of the government of Russia or any official thereof. In particular, the office did not find evidence likely to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that campaign officials such as Paul Manafort, George Papadopoulos, and Carter Page acted as agents of the Russian government or at its direction, control, or request during the relevant time period. I'll read you the highlighted part again. It says none of those guys, Paul Manafort, George Papadopoulos, or Carter Page, acted as agents of the Russian government or at its direction, control, or request during the relevant time period. So this is what it's saying. None of them had, and there's no evidence of anything. And so let me just get you to respond to this. This was tweeted out yesterday. No, this was tweeted out today. This is actually the 16th of April. So this was tweeted out 2 days before the Mueller report. And it was from someone, Larry Noble. It says, CNN just published my op-ed about why we should not be so quick to accept Barr's and Mueller's conclusion that the Trump campaign did not coordinate with Russia. So they're just not. So again, it's just there's no journalistic standard whatsoever at the Washington Post or the New York Times or any fucking place else in the country. There's no journalistic standards happening. And so when people wanted to, I remember during Obama's administration, and people made fun of Glenn Beck and people made fun of Sean Hannity because those guys were unhinged maniacs, and they were. And now the entire rest of the news media decided to parrot them. And they're just as unhinged and they're just as lunatics. And what makes them even worse is that they shame people like us who actually are adhering to journalistic standards. I was a pariah because I was actually adhering to journalistic standards. Now I know what it's like when Serpico walked into a police precinct. I know what it's fucking like to walk into a newsroom where everyone's pushing an unhinged, evidence-free conspiracy theory, and I'm standing up for journalistic standards, and I'm being fucking ostracized for it. I know what that's like. And so now I know that everybody in journalism is just as bad as Sean Hannity and Glenn Beck, given the situation. Rachel Maddow, worse than Glenn Beck.
You know, Jimmy, I want to read you my favorite quote so far from the report, okay? Because so the premise of the conspiracy theory is not just that, you know, Trump and Russia colluded during the campaign, but also if you were to watch, you know, Chris Hayes' show, you'd see him interview liberal pundits like Jonathan Chait, talk about why Trump might have been a Russian intelligence asset since 1987, right? And, you know, this was the widespread belief that Trump had all these extensive ties to Russia going back many years. He was cultivated by the Soviet Union, and that continued, right, you know, right through the time he was the host of The Apprentice. This was what grown adults doing journalism and politics for a living were spouting, right? So let me read to you like this line, though, from the Mueller report. So Mueller is talking about after the election, okay, after the election. And he says that after the election, which is what happens, you know, Russian officials, like all foreign governments do, wanted to start making contacts to the Trump campaign. Like that's what you do after a new campaign wins and they're coming in. Like you want to reach out to them as soon as possible. Everybody from around the world wants to talk to you if you're the winning candidate, right? So Mueller's talking about Russian government officials and prominent Russian businessmen began trying to make inroads into the new administration. This is again after the election. Mueller says this, quote, "They appeared not to have pre-existing contacts and struggled to connect with senior officials around the president-elect, aka Trump." So I was wondering if there's a conspiracy theorist out there who told us that Robert Mueller was going to validate the conspiracy theory, if they could explain to us if Trump and Russia were colluding not just during the election, but maybe all the way back to 1987, according to Jonathan Chait and Chris Hayes, why then did Russian officials and prominent Russian businessmen, quote, appeared not to have pre-existing contacts and struggled to connect with senior officials around the president-elect? So basically, Mueller is saying that the Russian government and prominent Russians had no contacts to Trump after he had won the election, and they struggled to make those contacts, which then makes it impossible then for there to have been this conspiracy in the many years preceding that, you know? And, you know, people are ignoring that passage, and they're going crazy over the fact that Mueller said stuff like, you know, Trump intermediaries spoke to people with links or ties to Russians, right? But that can mean anything. You know, if I go to Russia, or if I know a Russian, or if I claim to know a Russian, which is basically the definition that Mueller is using here, then that means I can have a link or a tie. Because, for example, Rob Goldstone, this music publicist who wrote the email to Don Jr., he is deemed as being someone who is presenting an offer to Trump on behalf of Russia because that's what he said in his email, even though in reality, Goldstone was making it up.
Yes.
As Goldstone recently told NPR, I had no idea what I was talking about. And that's why nobody in that Trump Tower meeting was indicted for perjury or obstruction of justice when they testified to Mueller and to Congress that meeting was about basically what the participants said it was, which was about the Magnitsky Act, and that Rob Goldstone was not indicted when he said he had made it all up and he didn't know what he was talking about. And that's why Robert Mueller destroys this whole key pillar of the Trump-Russia conspiracy theory, that this June 2016 Trump Tower meeting was like, you know, a part of like the Trump-Russia plot, when actually Mueller says that the information that Rob Goldstone said these Russians had was not even provided. So it was not even there. So, I mean, And that's what Glenn does in his article. If for anybody who reads it, and everybody should, is he goes through how just basically all the key pillars of the conspiracy theory have been destroyed. And it's funny that, there's even unequivocal language like that, like the fact that the Russians didn't even know who to contact in the Trump campaign after the election, that all that gets ignored because people are still so desperate, so infantile. They're basically acting like children in their bid to hold on to this narrative.
Yes, and what makes me upset is that I wanted to have a career where I acted like a child. That's why I became a comedian. And I wanted other people to act like grown-ups. Like when I get on the plane, I don't want the captain to look like a bigger screw-up than I am. I want that guy to be, I want him to be named Nigel, and I want him to be with a stiff chin, and I want him to take care of stuff. And that's what I want out of journalists too, except they're not. They actually are bigger fuck-ups and screw-ups than comedians. Mm-hmm. Comedians have a higher standard than these people. It's Aaron. I'm not. I can't even. I mean, it must be horrible for you because you have to stay in this profession the rest of your life. Like I'm not even in this profession. I'm just making fun of it. And I actually end up doing better work than the journalists do because I'm not bought or funded by the people I'm supposed to be reporting on. It's just that simple. And I'm not relying on a corporation for a promotion. And I'm not relying on some other corrupt motherfucker to give me a recommendation over at Newsweek so I can go work with a bunch of other RussiaGaters. I don't have to live in that world. But it's still overwhelming to me because I'm in it a little and I'm in the real world, which is now being ruined because no one's paying any attention to the horrible stuff that's happening because everyone's spinning an evidence-free conspiracy theory that red baits the president, from The Intercept to the New York Times to the Democracy Now to fucking the Young Turk to everywhere, to every goddamn place that I loved. And it is crushing to me. It is crushing to me. And I don't know how those people look themselves in the mirror anymore without I don't know how you go on the air and not apologize for a fucking week straight.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I never expected to make it in the mainstream. I never expected to go on MSNBC. I once actually wanted to work there I once was a big fan of Chris Hayes. I thought initially he was doing the best he possibly could within the confines of cable news to be a progressive. And I thought, I wanted to, I produced at Democracy Now! For many years and at Al Jazeera. I applied once to be a job as a producer on Chris's show, of course, before RussiaGate, and had RussiaGate hit and I was there, I wouldn't have lasted. But the point is, I never expected to be able to express my views myself on cable news because, I just wouldn't be allowed to say them because I don't stay within the acceptable standard of like a spectrum of the bipartisan foreign policy consensus that, and the bipartisan basically political spectrum when it comes to any issue, which is the spectrum that the cable news networks operate in. But, what has been troubling for me is, many colleagues in progressive and adversarial media to be maligned there and to see people, there have been some consequences for taking the stance I've taken. And, that part to me is difficult, is disappointing. But at the same time, we all make our choices. And I'm, like a day like today is a good reminder of why we do what we do, because we believe in truth, and no matter what the consequences of that are. And that's sort of a higher principle if we take journalism seriously. So, I mean, look, but personally, yes, it has been disappointing and it has been difficult. It's been a difficult couple of years. But, on the bright side, I do think that the mentality that propelled this for so long is going to be harder to sustain, at least on the progressive side, because more and more people are realizing what a scam this was, and it's hard, and to the credit of people like Cenk at the Young Turks, he's allowed, he brings on people to debate him, and you were there for a long time giving a contrary point of view. So it's not all, terrible. And to Democracy Now's credit, I should say that they did have Glenn Greenwald on a lot to offer the skeptic's point of view. So it's not all terrible, but it's still pretty depressing.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, yes, tip of the hat, as I've always done, to Cenk Uygur for providing the platform at the Young Turks for the Aggressive Progressive show, where I could bring on people like you, and I could bring on people like Bill Binney, and I could also push back. And he never silenced me, never tried to. We ended up being the ones that were right and doing the good reporting on it and having journalistic standards. And I would say every week when we went in there, I would quote Ron Placone on the aggressive progressives. I'd say, I hate Trump just as much as anybody, and I'm not going to let him steal my critical thinking skills. But there are a lot of people who freely did that. So, yeah, you're right. I was just on an interview at Sky News, and I said, the real tip-off of how corrupt the news media is in the United States is that not once did they bring on anybody like Aaron Maté or me or Bill Binney. They didn't bring on anybody to debunk or even give a counter narrative to the thing that they were screaming about 24/7. Not one time did they bring me on or bring you on. They hadn't brought Glenn Greenwald on MSNBC since like 2016. That's the big revealer.
Since December 2016.
So to me, that's the big reveal that this wasn't accidental. They were getting it wrong accidentally, and they were really trying their best and doing due diligence. They knew what they were doing. Chris Hayes knows what he's doing. He's way smarter than me. He just doesn't have as much integrity as me, and he doesn't have any courage. And he's a nerd, so he normally doesn't have courage. Nerds aren't known for their courage, and obviously he doesn't. And that's why he was chosen by the corporate elite to have that job. And if he wasn't a guy with no integrity, with no courage, he wouldn't fucking have that job. And that's not hyperbole, Aaron. That's a goddamn fact. If he had integrity, he would have been out of that door during the Bernie Sanders campaign, just like Ed Schultz, and he fucking doesn't. And why do they hire someone who is a nerd like Chris Hayes? Because it's the perfect beard for an evil, nefarious corporation pushing propaganda and war. He's the perfect. You would never think that guy would be a corrupt, bought piece of it, and he is 100%.
I will agree with you in the sense that I'll say that if he did his job, he wouldn't be in that job.
Of course not. He's willfully not doing his job. He's willfully not bringing you on. He's willfully not bringing me on because we would expose his fucking ass in 5 seconds. And the only time he brings on a progressive is to wag his finger at them for not propping up the establishment when he brought on Susan Sarandon. That's the only time he does something like that. That guy is fucking worthless, just like the rest of the news media. I've had it with God damn it, Aaron. I outscooped that motherfucker for 2.5 years. Me, I smoke pot when I wake up in the morning, and I outscoop Chris Hayes, who has a $10 million staff. I got fucking just me and a couple of comedians hanging around us. That's it. That's what we got. And somehow I was able to find you. I was able to find Bill Binney, John Kiriakou. I was able to find all this information and all the bullshit I was able to expose. And I'm dumb. And so the fact that I can do it and they don't tells me that they're corrupt to the core and they're fucking worthless.
Hey, Jimmy, by the way, side note, this is tangential, but I also recall that you were actually, I think, the first with a major platform to interview Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, which again speaks to your finger. I don't know how you do it, but your finger is on the pulse in ways that, like pretty much virtually in the entire journalism industry isn't. Because you were on that one way before anybody.
So thank you very much for noticing. At some point, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will also notice that and thank us for our help in helping get her profile raised. Hi, Jimmy. So she knew who I was, and then they won't come back on my show. So people are afraid of this show. I get it. The establishment has put out an edict that you can't go on the Jimmy Dore show, but only real rebels come on the show, like Tulsi Gabbard. Ro Khanna came on the show. So lots of great people come on, like Ralph Nader, yourself, Chris Hedges. So we have all the real deal people on. We just don't have any of the fake motherfuckers. And it's sad to see. I don't mind if that's the role we provide for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and people like that. Like before anyone knows them, we make them, we introduce them to the country, and then they never talk to us again because they're in bed with the establishment. I'll take it. And it just goes to show you don't get too close to your heroes, right? Because they'll always let you down. So there are no permanent allies. There's only, as Chris Hedges says, there's only permanent interests. So when my interests align with Bernie and align with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I will help push those interests. But I'm no longer operating under the illusion that they're, solid.
We're like a hip college radio
Well, they're
station
playing-
for progressives.
Say it again. Ron's got to say something. Go ahead.
We're like
sorry,
a hip
sorry, Ron.
college radio station for progressive politicians.
Yeah, we're like
they were here first.
yeah.
We knew them since the debut.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Aaron. Go ahead.
Well, Jimmy, the one thing I want to say on that is not everyone can afford to keep it as real as you do. That's just a fact. You know what I mean? If people have families to feed and they have, liability, it's just true. So, I don't fault everyone for not having a perfect level of integrity. You know what I mean? Like I just don't, because not everyone can do it. And, people have different situations and people have to make compromises. You're in a really great position where you've built this thing for yourself where you can say whatever you want. And it's amazing. And you deserve tons of credit for it. And that's why you're having so much success, is because people just feel so refreshed and actually salvaged by a dose of integrity, which is so lacking elsewhere. But just because others lack it, many people just don't have the freedom to do it. That's just the unfortunate reality of media. I can tell you myself, like, I would have loved to have said more things about my opinions, but I had to make compromises sometimes because I don't want to alienate everybody.
I know.
So it's just how it is. It's just the sad reality of how it is. And look, I mean, I can tell you that in this case, though, Michael Tracy is somebody else, where even the consequence of getting it right is sometimes hardship. I mean, I think also about Norman Finkelstein, someone who you've interviewed, right?
Yeah.
Just brilliant principled defender of Palestinian rights, way before everyone, so many people at least who jumped on the Palestinian cause, which I'm not dissing. I'm just saying that Norman was on this forever, and his knowledge is unparalleled. But for his integrity, he's paid a huge price. Basically Alan Dershowitz, waged a campaign to get him denied tenure at DePaul, and because Norman, with his authority, if he were allowed to be in academia and if he were protected institutionally, he could have done even more damage to the prevailing narrative about Israel than he's already done. Because people with institutional protection, they can do stuff. Chomsky had protection because he's like a brilliant MIT scientist. But not everybody has that institutional protection, and so accordingly, not everyone can be as honest and have as much integrity as those who do. And you're a special case where you built it up entirely on your own. And for that, you deserve a lot of credit and a lot of gratitude from people who rely on it.
Well, it's my pleasure. I really only wanted to ever do comedy and tell jokes about stuff like this. And so now this show affords me the ability to tour the country and internationally and fill rooms and theaters and do what I always dreamed of. So it really worked out. And, it's been a real pleasure to get to know someone like you. Right. And it's not, I'm more of a loose cannon. And you are so meticulous, just like they described you. You're so meticulous, and you have such high standards. It's nice to be in your orbit, so you can kind of keep me tethered, right? So it's been really great getting to know you, and I'm a real admirer of your work, and I'm really celebrating your success, and congratulations on all the on not only that award but all the accolades that you should have coming, and so. So I'm sure a lot. So your phone's still not ringing off the hook, though?
Phone's still not ringing off the hook, but that's okay.
All right, Aaron Maté, thank you so much for being on the show, and thanks for your great work. And we look forward to having you on again.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Next live Jimmy Dore show is June 5th. That's a Wednesday at Hermosa Beach Comedy Club in Hermosa Beach, California. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all tickets. We might be coming to your town. And if you love the show, please become a patron. Please support the show. We give you hours of bonus material every week. And please click that bell and make sure you're subscribed. Even if you think you are already subscribed, they unsubscribe people every day. Just check. Thanks for your support.